Welcome to Backyard Cigars for what I believe is the final installment of We Need to Talk about the Retrohale. And in the series so far, there have been 3 installments released, and I actually believed that the 3rd installment would be the last, so I kind of promised you that that would be the case. So I'd call this extra innings. And I think that looking at it as what's become such a big part of many people's smoking experiences, that it does deserve more attention in a different way than the attention it's been getting. It does deserve more discussion that, dare I say, warrants more than a few hours worth of discussion, even if not at one time. And I think that if I hadn't really learned as much as I learned about the Retrohale as when I was researching it, I would not have felt that it needed to be such a large series. But when you're lucky enough to encounter so much information on something, then you feel compelled to really share that. And when I was recommended to check out Cigar Sense, which is on YouTube, on Facebook, online, my good friend Luther recommended that I check these guys out because they were doing some really groundbreaking scientific research into the world of cigars. And that they smoke cigars, I know, they do. But they're not saying that they're the ultimate authority on everything tobacco related, cigar related, just because they're doing these groundbreaking scientific researches. On the contrary, they're saying, look, even within the precise measurement of certain things, there are times that you still can't fully measure because of the differences from individual to individual. So it's hard to pin certain things down. It's like the whole thing where I said, Retrohale provides 50% of the enjoyment of the smoke. To who? To you? So maybe to you. And maybe that's what the percentage you deem fit to quantify just how important that particular Retrohale is with that particular cigar. But for someone else, it might be 10%. And yet for another, it might be 0 or 3%. I'm just throwing percentages out here because it's hard to quantify. It's hard to really measure that. So what is and what isn't? I mean, there are things that we do know. We know about the tasting of cigars and some of the basic flavors that you get. We know about there are individual palates. An individual might actually develop his palate while another individual may not, or just not ever get around to it, not see a reason why he has to develop his palate. And he's perfectly fine with that, and that's perfectly fine. Then there are individuals that are interested in knowing much more about the flavor of cigars. And Cigar Sense, from a video that they recorded on 8/29/2020, and it's called Cigar Sense, The Science of Cigar Tasting. It was a live stream. I believe it was so Franca Comparetto, she was moderating, she was the host, and the topic was cigar tasting. And Constantine Heikemp, scientist of wine, food, and liquids, 4 different college degrees. He's a sensory scientist. He contributed a lot and continues to contribute a lot to Cigar Sense with his scientific knowledge. He is also currently Chief Science Officer and Head of Marketing Development for Hawaiian Aloha Brewing Company. And so, as we know that are lovers of beer, that there's a lot of chemistry and scientific stuff going on behind the scenes with yeast and all these different types of things that will enhance the flavor of a beer and improve its shelf life and all of those things that we benefit from. So Constantine notes, and these are notes from this video, of course. I'm going to attach the video. It'll be I'm going to attach it temporarily for just a bit, as you know, maybe I can't, maybe I won't. So if I don't, you're just gonna have to check out the video yourself. And one of the notes some of the notes that I took down here, comparing cigars versus wine tasting, framing of cigar smoking, the physical preparation, and for in comparing cigars to wine tasting, that is good, because I want to tell you something. It has been said that, and this came from a prominent cigar reviewer who said, I respect his opinion, and I have nothing but love for him, not any form of disrespect. I'm just quoting something he said. And he said, for me, if a reviewer does not retrohale, or he said for within the industry, if a reviewer does not retrohale, I'm not going to trust his reviews. That's what he said, and I respect that. I know what he's saying. Why do I mention that in particular? Well, because maybe there are some reviewers that don't retrohale. I don't have a problem with it necessarily. It's good for transparency when the reviewer just comes out and says, hey, listen, I don't retrohale. What he doesn't have to give a reason, but if he chooses to, he gives a reason. As you see, I have my own approach when it comes to the retrohale, and how I approach it in terms of the ratio, in terms of the type of retrohale, and I also have my issues which I have to take into account. But I also have my experience with the retrohale, and I, with this added research, feel that I know an adequate enough about the retrohale that I can speak on it very clearly, without bias, without favoritism. Can it be a pleasurable thing? We've already discussed that. Yes, it can be a pleasurable thing for some, for lots of folks, and then for not so many folks. And in saying about the reviewer that doesn't, and things like that, or maybe even a reviewer that doesn't do the full-blown traditional retro, let's take a look at the wine industry. I worked within the wine industry for many years, and I'm no wine expert, but I learned the job as best as I could. And one of the things that, of course, many professional wine tasters would do when we were tasting wine was, even my own boss, he would obviously, and you know what I'm going to get to, pour the cup, push it around, spit it out. Okay. They feel more than confident, I will tell you this, that they are getting the essence of the flavors of that wine and what that wine represents by doing that, by swishing it around. Maybe a trickle or two ends up, actually passing your throat, but more than likely not. And it doesn't mean that you're not absorbing the alcohol. You're still absorbing some alcohol. And I've seen this done with whiskey as well, where Matt from ADH Whiskey talks about, the difference between a taster who's just swishing it around and spitting it out versus someone who's actually drinking the whiskey. And in regards to what you taste and what you don't taste, and the major differences. But let's get wine, whiskey. But it relates to cigars, right? And often a lot of these things pair with cigars. But that's not why I'm bringing this up. Why I'm bringing this up is because when a wine taster tells you, pro wine taster, I tasted everything. Now, here's me behind the counter, I'm going to drink it. I'm not going to swish it around and spit it out. I'm going to drink it, and I'm going to swish a little bit. I'm going to go through the whole technique, but I'm going to swallow the wine. And then I'm automatically, by doing that, I'm going to have a different experience, and perhaps even a different take from that professional wine taster. Now, a great wine palate is a great wine palate, right? Just like someone who has a great palate for whiskey or a great palate for cigars, you can't take away from that. They've developed it, they've worked at it, they've honed it. In many cases, it's a professional career. In other cases, it's just a hobby. But you take the wine person who tells you everything, and they would tell me everything that they got from it, and they would compare it to what I tasted. And a lot of times, they tasted many things that I did not taste. Then there were some similarities where it was pretty similar. But guess what? I can talk about the finish and how it affected me once completely ingested into my system, the way we normally appreciate wine when we're drinking it and loving it. The taster can't. Maybe they can draw from experience, right? And then just from what they're tasting, they can tell you based on the breadth of their experience, the depth of their experience, what to expect in the finish, or more than likely would be the finish would be like. And they might get it spot on because of their experience. But if you're just an individual who's just practicing the technique at home, you're not a professional, you have a decent palate, you're swishing the wine around, you're spitting it out, and then you're comparing your experience to the person across from you who drank it, you may not be able to draw from that experience. So you automatically don't know what the finish is like, or don't know for sure what the finish is like. Maybe you can imagine it. Maybe you've been studying, maybe you can imagine it. And you might be right, or you might be wrong. But either way, the experience is going to be different, right? So are you saying that the person who is swishing it in their mouth and tasting the flavors of the wine or that whiskey is not tasting enough to be able to tell what the wine is like and what it represents and everything else? With or without experience, they're still tasting a lot. And the biggest difference when that wine taster actually drinks the wine is that they get a more fulfilling experience. They get a different sensation. They experience the wine differently, but it doesn't mean that they didn't know what the wine was about when they only swished it and spit it out. I'm reaching possibly here with this analogy, but if the non-retrohaler is the individual who's swishing, and the retrohaler is the person who is supposedly enjoying it to the fullest and experiencing it exactly how it should be experienced, then that would mean that he's the individual drinking the wine completely, being able to judge the experience from a different angle. The only thing I see here is that there is a difference in the two. In the case of wine and whiskey, one is intended and should. The intention and the proper way to enjoy wine would be to sit down and actually drink it. But for tasting purposes and other reasons, professionals have to do the spitting because they're trying many different things, and then they don't want to become inebriated, even with the swishing, and they can still get a little buzz, and they need to keep the palate sharp. And so experiencing it in a small amount and in that manner allows them to do their job and to be good at it. When it comes to cigar smoking, there has never been a rule from the beginning of time when cigars began to be smoked that in order to enjoy your cigar or to smoke it correctly, you had to retrohale. That was just never a thing. And I think I've proven that with some of the small examples that I've given from the old archives in the old 1860s and 1880s, where it was definitely something that was happening, but it wasn't the norm. It wasn't something anyone really talked about in even a positive manner. At times it was a negative and it was frowned upon. And I'm not saying that it should be now. I'm just saying this is what it was then. Now it should just be whatever it is. If people want to do it and people get enjoyment out of it, they should do it. They should know if there are any risks involved. They should know if it's really necessary. They should know that it's a choice, that it's a preference, and that either way, whatever way you're doing it, if you're enjoying it, you know, that's the most important thing. I picked out this cigar today because I wanted something smooth and creamy. I haven't smoked in a few days, so I just kind of wanted to unwind. And it's, you know, it's 80 degrees. It's a beautiful day. It's not too humid out. You know, I've had this cigar now for about 7 months in the humidor at about 65, 66 RH. It's a 6x56 Toro Gordo, and it's called Cabal Gran Cabal. And this is by Chris Arofolo of Cabal Cigars, teaming up with Hendrik Kellner Jr. Yes, of that Hendrik Kellner of Davidoff. And so he comes from that family, and he's got it in his blood. And they've got KBF, which is a Kellner Boutique Factory, I believe, and it's something new that he's done. So they took about 2 years to develop this blend, and they came up with this blend: a Dominican wrapper, a Dominican piloto binder, and filler from Nicaragua and the Dominican Republic, and no, actually, filler from Nicaragua and Pennsylvania. No indication of Pennsylvania broadleaf, just Pennsylvania, and again, the wrapper being Dominican. So it's billed as medium-bodied, creamy, mild, touches of cedar. So far, it's kind of lived up to that. It's kind of had all of that. You know, the Kellner legacy is something to be taken seriously, right, and respected, of course. So I'm sure that Hendrik Kellner Jr. is following in his father's footsteps and really putting his best foot forward in his new cigar company. And if any indication here, I'm enjoying the cigar, and I think it's pretty smooth, and I'm really liking it. Constantine, the scientist that I was talking about in the video, the science of cigar tasting, he talks about the framing of the cigar smoking experience, your physical preparation, our mood, our energy, hedonistic pursuit, sensitivity to nicotine, what we eat, meals 1 hour before and with a rinse of mouth is recommended. Certain foods like spicy bind to the tongue and the palate for hours. The setting should be comfortable, familiar, and undistracted. Proper lighting if needed. And then there's something to be said about your expectations as well going into the experience. Now, a lot of this he's saying in regards to, you know, people reviewing cigars, whether we're talking the professional or non-professional, or to some degree, you know, the smoker himself, the everyday smoker who just wants to enjoy his cigar. And a lot of us have these little rituals and you know, things that we do to prepare our smoking experience, or just these little patterns that we may have, or maybe we have a particular spot that we like to sit, a particular chair, things of that nature. And when we're talking about expectations, we're talking about your preferences of construction. A good example he cited was the draw. You know, some people might like an open draw, some people might like a more conservative draw. And there are even individuals that like a tighter draw. That's just what they like. And that plays a part in their expectation of that cigar experience. He goes on to say, keep in mind the hard labor that went into the cigar and have a sense of respect. He recommends that you save your harsh bias against cigars and have a self-awareness and not trash a cigar. He quotes Jose Blanco, who said one time, "Don't think about combustion, take them as gifts." He was handing out some free cigars. Constantine says, It's not a reliable statement, as he was lowering expectations by telling you already, don't worry about the construction, don't worry about the combustion. He's trying to already lower your expectations of the cigar. Constantly detach, if possible, in reviews or smoking a cigar, and detaching from any bias that you may have. Sensory experience relating to taste and smell, it leaves an imprint that binds to your receptors. Depending on your receptors and your stimuli, it can take time for receptors to free up and rebuild, especially if their stimuli has been irritating. Sensitivity is reduced in frequent exposure to certain foods. Cultural experiences can change your perceptions, especially in a pipe smoke, but also in foods and cigars. A Mexican may find some cigars not so spicy. Cigar flavors stay on your tongue flavor. I don't know if he actually said the Mexican may find some cigars not so spicy, or if I added that in. It's quite possible that I added that in and I forgot to note the fact that that was my addition. People complain that cigar flavors stay on the tongue longer. They need a rested tongue and nose for reviews, plus saliva flow rates, time of day, mood, expectation, what you eat or will eat, space and location. Review more than just for the hedonistic enjoyment, more for technical analysis. Begin with a clean palate. On sense of smell, he says olfactory. Blow your nose before tasting. People may get mucous membrane dried out. Remove dust. You shouldn't wear cologne or any kind of odorous scent so that you can have neutral physicality or physical. Resetting your olfactory by smelling your hands without any scents on it. Many cigars begin with a spicy sensation that irritated, a spicy peppery sensation that irritated our cranial nerve. Dryness of saliva affects your taste. You gravitate towards water, but even the water you choose can affect your palate. Standards, of course, are filtered and distilled water. Certain waters have flavors. Nothing has topped water, especially in the wine world industry. That means a reviewer cannot be dehydrated. Tap waters are different in composition by location. On a heavy red wine, it was determined that sparkling water was best, but Constantine believes distilled water was better, and sparkling it would be better for a white, as an example of just how preference can make a difference. There are things that can affect the tobacco in the cigar, how the tobacco is cured and fermented, the aging, soil composition, and how that relates to water. Each puff is a sample of a cigar. You could treat it in such a way. And then there's the physiological response. The cigar starts off peppery, stimulating the brain, and the brain detects it and basically begins tuning it out as a protective measure. Evolution progression, aka transitions, I wrote that, as most cigars change slowly. In order for you to perceive other things, it is so we can smell and taste other things. I don't know what I just said, but I said it and he said it, so I'm not gonna have to explain that one. Example, how we detect smoke even when we don't expect it. Now I kind of get it. There is not enough testing on the pairing of water and cigars during reviews and tests. Constantine says our preference still overrides everything. Anything other than water can modify the cigar tasting. In cigar factories, they use roasted, unsalted almonds. The almond's fat content and how it binds to your tongue and your fat is a great carrier of flavor and can insulate your tongue and palate. It affords protection from harsh pepper, so almonds may allow you to taste flavors longer. But there is a downside. And I guess the downside is that, as he explained it, too much of anything isn't good. So you might want to actually taste some of those peppery notes and get a sense of how spicy the cigar is. He says pairings are just that. They're pairings. When you're reviewing a cigar with a drink, he considers that a pairing. So, and he said there's nothing wrong with that. At least I take that's what he said. Some are natural pairings and others are not wise to do. Example, red wine. And so he believes that actually some of the red wines really don't go as well with cigars. He believes there are so many variables in what could affect the pairing, such as temperature of liquids paired. Franca Comparetto says it's all very exhaustive towards the end of the show in regards to all of the info that was provided by Constantine. And obviously I just gave you a quick summary and some notes on what he said, but it was an extensive, over an hour. I watched it 3 times, and so I really wanted to understand everything that he was saying and come away with a wealth of knowledge. I have to say thank you to Cigar Sense, and the material that I have here is thanks to the videos that they've done and the information that they've provided, and the interviews that they've had with individuals like Constantine. Constantine did say, look, chocolate pairs very well with cigars. The components of chocolate go very well with cigar flavors. One is combining 2 stimuli. Correcting a cigar by addition of a certain food, example chocolate, or example a citrus seltzer. Sodas pair very well with cigars. Certain liquids foods can only enhance certain flavors of a cigar. Certain trained smokers who are evaluating several cigars may use these pairings in order to stave off fatigue. So, tricks of the trade, things that one can do in order to continue to keep that palate moving forward, especially if they are in the profession and they have to review many cigars or sample many cigars. In a professional review / testing, it's usually more than one person smoking the cigar, never one. Companies and sales reps' descriptions of a cigar's flavors are mainly suggestive and could affect how you taste the cigar. Franca asks about how emotions play a role in the cigar experience, and Constantine replies that he likes his technical learnings but accepts that emotions can play a role despite attempts to detach. The infused experiment with Davidoff, where the cigar is infused with natural flavors that the cigar exhibits, basically increasing certain flavors like pepper or barnyard. So it's an experiment by Davidoff that they did where they infused the cigar with cigar flavors, with main parts of what that cigar tastes like without any infusion. They captured that essence and infused the cigar, basically boosting all of those flavors, basically giving you a cigar with a retrohale built in, right? That's what they did. And then if you retrohaled that, you'd be double retrohaling. So because you'd be getting the double dose of, it's already infused with the highlighted flavors of the cigar. So he says professionals can differentiate tobacco flavors due to experience, but it's much harder for the ordinary consumer. Discussing on how there are different types of cinnamon, vanilla. One vanilla could be a floral, other vanilla could be earthy. Even trying to distinguish certain tobacco flavors is challenging due to the geographic location and seasonality. If a professional may not be able to detect tobaccos they don't have experience with experience, they can achieve this knowledge, but usually more about the tobaccos they usually know more about the tobaccos that they work with. Don't let a cigar wrapper let you have an expectation of what the cigar will be like, as the actual blend may change the traditional flavors. And some of these things he admits that a lot of cigar smokers already know, and people within the industry obviously already know this. But taking it to another level and actually adding it into the equation of how you taste a cigar, how you grade a cigar, how you review a cigar is a different story. And it gets scientific with Constantine. So he says scientific study of cigars is complex and difficult. Guest speaker then speaks on the importance of the cigar sense and the education of the cigar community. This guest speaker touched on how important it was what Cigar Sense was doing. And I know that this guest speaker, from what I gather, is a very experienced person with connections to the industry, and he knows quite a lot about what he's talking about. So he was giving a big thank you, big shout out to them, and really just discussing some of his thoughts on the cigar industry. Now, Constantine ends with some scientific tests on the variables that he feels need to be performed. Those studies can be easily overridden by cultural practices, customs, and expectations of what things should taste like. And you know, Branca, in another video, Cigar Sense, titled "Difference Between Sensory Panel versus a Consumer Panel," is Franca Comparetto says that tasting done by Cigar Sense sensory panel goes above the consumer data. Consumer data does not produce its own product measurement. Cigar Sense still has a small data to find, and true correlations you need millions of samples. Sensory panel is done in the lab. There are many consumers that know more than the cigar sensory panel. We're only talking about data and testing. You know, so I will add that, you know, Cigar Sense is definitely needed within the cigar community. Cigarsense.com, they're doing something important, and we've got to look at their research, and we've got to look at what they're saying, and just take into account what they are testing. And you know, if you go on, you will see that they have something where it's called developing the nose, and the perception of aromas, for which we need our nose, is more complex. They like to talk about developing the nose rather than the palate. And they recommend things like checking the aroma wheels, smelling things around the garden, very much like you know, some of the things that Constantine said, which is make your sense of smell aware when you're walking down the street and you're walking anywhere. Maybe you don't like the fact that you just smelled urine or you smelled garbage. Sometimes, and this has been pointed out before, you know, we talk about certain individuals talk about cigar flavors that they perceive, and without having actually tasted that. Like, I think I've talked about how I know what hay tastes like because I was at a carnival or festival of some sort, and I was pushed into a bale of hay, and hay went everywhere. So I know what hay tastes like. I didn't forget that. Probably wasn't the only time. That I know what leather tastes like because I've bitten into leather when I was a kid, and my mom was trying to whoop me, and I bit the leather belt like a dog, trying to avoid the whooping. That's just my experiences, and I can speak to that. Other people haven't tasted leather, but they can imagine what leather tastes like through their olfactory sense. But Branca, in her article, lists about use your senses when they are most alert. It is easier to focus on a cigar or on a training exercise as described above earlier in the day when your senses are more receptive, as opposed to after a heavy meal at the end of the day when your senses can be affected by fatigue. On the retrohale, she says, retrohaling means bringing the smoke from within your mouth upward toward your nose cavity as far as possible. Some people fully exhale the smoke through the nose. Some others just do it partially or even now and then. Some people not at all, as they find it irritating. If it's irritating for you and or you cannot obtain results, aromas, perception, when trying to simply bring the smoke toward the nose cavity, you can try this. Right after the emptying your mouth from the smoke, you can inhale air, not smoke, through the mouth and exhale through the nose. This can still grant some perceptions without being too hard on your nose. So that's like you're basically you're letting it out. And you get some of the flavors. Faint, because what I've got here is kind of like a hay and cream with cedar, soft cedar. So I'll do it again. Normal. You just let this air blow out your nose, and you still manage to get a little bit of flavor. Now, of course, previous, Branca had Travis Pappenheim show his other technique, which I had talked about in the previous installment, and how that one was sort of like a retrohale that didn't go fully into the traditional retrohale where the smoke comes out of your nose, but it still reaches the top of the receptors. And that's it. And if you're wondering, well, you know, I've never really seen you do that too much in your videos. Like, well, you look kind of silly sometimes when you're doing some of these things, I would say. Or at least one can feel a little silly. Like, I'm not keen on blowing up, although I've done it in private. I wouldn't really feel keen on doing that on camera, because I think it looks a little funny. But for the purpose of education here, the purpose of providing an example, one has to, you know, show and tell. Branca says, inhaling the smoke is very different from retrohaling. A cigar smoke is absorbed mainly in the oral membranes as opposed to cigarette smoke, where the nicotine has a different form and is absorbed through the bronchial membranes in order to satisfy the smoker. Therefore, it is not advisable to inhale the cigar smoke, especially when the objective of the enjoyment of the cigar and the perceptions of its aromas. Aromas are perceived through the nose, not through the lungs. You know, she says, look, write notes, compare cigars, smoke slowly, smoke at a slow pace. Rather than asking the cigar to adjust to your rhythm, adjust to the rhythm of your cigar. If you smoke nervously and fast, the cigar may become too hot. See, there's some things that we know, right? You know, then she has other little experiments that one can perform at home just to improve their smoking experience, and very helpful stuff. So in the Toronto World, January 8th, 1918, we have an article here. This is 1918. Ask your nose, okay? And this is the article here. It's reversed. You know, maybe it'll be the thumbnail. How's that? So it says, ask your nose whether the cigar you smoke has been thoroughly cured and matured. Let the smoke come through your nostrils. Does it irritate? Question mark. Is it raw, harsh, peppery, or scratchy? Question mark. If it is, the tobacco is not properly cured. Ask your nose about any cigars, any of Dave's cigars. You will find it mild, mellow, smooth, free of any of the faults mentioned. Why not try a Davis Perfection? Question mark, for 10 cents. Now, what's interesting about that is that here is the year 1918, and you have an ad that is asking smokers to retrohale. And it's asking people to retrohale in order to determine the quality of the tobacco. So the idea is, ask your nose. Your nose will be able to tell you if you retrohale, pull the smoke out of your nostrils. If it's going to irritate you, then tobacco's no good. Now, we know this isn't true, obviously. We know it's not true because we know that the very act of retrohaling sometimes can be irritating because you're retrohaling a peppery cigar from Nicaragua. But this is 1918. Nicaragua's not on the map. Honduras is not on the map. The Dominican Republic is nowhere near on the map. It's Cuba. It's Puerto Rico. It's a little bit maybe from Costa Rica and maybe a little bit from a couple of other places that are not really known that well for it. You've got some Brazilian tobacco out there going on, and then you've got the good old American crops from Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Georgia, Florida. Some might even say North Carolina, although that was used, I think, for pipes and maybe cigarettes. And the American market for tobacco is producing a lot of cigarettes. So a lot of their tobacco production is going into the making of cigarettes. And places like Ohio are, I don't know if they're even developed in 1918 yet. But what I'm saying is that it's not true, because what essentially he's saying is that the best cigars to retrohale are smooth, mild cigars. And in 1918, smooth, mild cigars that you got from Cuba. You know, a lot of those were Cuban cigars, and they were smooth and mild. They had strength, no doubt about it. They did, but they didn't have the strength of, say, a full-blown Nicaraguan peppery cigar from Esteli. Although I do find that some Cuban cigars nowadays are made very spicy, very intensely spicy. But my experiences with smoking vintage Cuban tobacco, albeit not completely scientifically accurate, because I'm smoking tobacco that's been aged for many, many, many years, is that it was a very smooth, mild tobacco. And although it did have nicotine strength, it wasn't something that got you, strong right away. It was something of more of an accumulative effect. And from my interviews with older men, specifically my grandfather, who smoked nothing but Cubans for many, many years, the descriptions of what the tobacco tasted like were that it was mild, it was soft, it was smooth, it was sweet, it had a little spice but nothing crazy. And we can't expect Cuban cigars to maintain that same profile that they had from 1918 or even 1958. Things change. Soil composition, climate warming, whatever you want to call it, the changing of the times. Climate issues are real. I don't know about every single piece of information that is presented, but I have noticed things are different with the climate in my life. I can't speak for anyone else, but so that's something that was very interesting to me. That ad, I laughed, almost fell out of my chair when I read it, because it was hilarious. So I have another article here from the Gettysburg Compiler, August 29th, and this is from 1893, and it says, "Give me a light," and it says, naturally I smoke good cigars, but I do not smoke in public. Why? Well, for the simple reason that I do not wish to be compelled to give a light to any Tom, Dick, or Harry that comes along. Many men, and I am one of them, like to smoke a cigar so as to leave the ash on the end. Moreover, I am particular about my cigars. You can neither preserve the ash or be particular if you smoke in public. For a man is considered a bore if he does not cheerfully give a light when asked for one. This is the custom in all countries. For instance, in Spain, and this manner of giving a light is copied by both the French and Italian. When a man is asked for a light, he bows most gracefully, and as if anxious to do the other a favor, presents his cigar, holding out the lighted end at a slight angle between the thumb and second finger. The other receives the cigar, and after getting the needed light from it, returns it with an even more graceful bow than that bestowed upon himself. Each then raises his hat and turns to go away. The Spaniard invariably smokes through his nose. He considers it wasteful to smoke through his mouth, and inveterate smokers of all countries agree with him. Do you agree with him in that opinion? Asks the individual conducting this interview. And he says, please excuse me, "No, I can't say that I do. Although I acknowledge that the sensation produced upon the delicate nerves of the nose is exquisite, I myself, however, am perfectly satisfied with smoking in the ordinary way. I suppose because I am accustomed to it. The Spaniards may be right, however, for any smoker must have noticed that if he shuts his eyes and smokes, he cannot tell whether his cigar is lighted or not. This, I think, shows that the nerves of the mouth and palate soon become deadened, or at least partially so." "What nationality is the most reluctant in giving a light?" asked the interviewer. "The average Englishman, I think, hates to do it. You just ask for one and for a light and see. First he looks at you as if wondering at your presumption. Then he takes his cigar from his mouth and looks at it as if hating to part with it even for a moment. Next he hands it to you begrudgingly and acts as if he had achieved a mighty feat in condensation. Instead of lifting his hat, he is more apt to thrust his hands in his trousers pocket as he receives it back, and he stalks off with an air of indignation." Now, that interview occurred in 1899, and it occurred because a reporter was standing next to a car that had a very well-dressed man in it, and that very well-dressed man was asked for a light by the reporter from his cigar, and that wealthy man revealed himself to be someone within the tobacco industry that imports cigars. And he makes it very clear to the reporter, "I'm not a retailer, I'm not a distributor, I am an importer of cigars." I don't know if he said he's not a distributor, but he said he's at importation is his strong point. And it's 1899, or did I say 1898? And retrohaling is experiencing a little bit of a boom here. Retrohaling is being, now you saw the ad from 1918 that talked about the nose, right? Now actually that article was from 1893. 1893. And what I'm noticing in the trends here from the archives, from what I've studied, the earliest example of something in regards to a retrohale, whether it came from a cigar or not, was in the 1860s. The first example with a cigar was in the 1880s. And now we have here, and obviously there are many, I read many articles that were from the 1890s as well, 1898. And so the last article, 1893, and then one from 1918. And these articles detail actual cigar retrohaling, as opposed to just including the cigarette. So by 1893, we're talking about the retrohale in cigars, specifically. And then we have, talk about it in the early to, say the early 1900s, right? Up until maybe the 1920s. And remember, in the 1920s, and then it becomes a whole lot about the cigarette and the retrohale of the cigarette. So that's its own thing. We won't get into that. But here I have something from the Victoria Advocate, January 4th, 1975 or 6, one of the two. This is an article that it was the Prodigal cigar has returned. Señor Garcia is the managing director of the Menendez Garcia Isiao Limitada, which manufactured the world-renowned H. Upmann, pronounced in Spanish, Hecha Upmann, and Montecristo cigars. When Fidel Castro intervened in his cigar factories, Señor Garcia and his brother Pepe, who operated the business together, bolted Cuba in 1960. They're talking about a cigar. This particular H. Upmann cigar was, in the strictest sense, matchless. A flame was soon forthcoming from a companion. Señor Garcia lit the cigar delicately, lighting, sniffing, observing his handiwork, adding more match. Then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and dragged. He has smoked several cigars a day for 40 years. He does not inhale. That, he says with a drop of scorn, is for cigarette smokers who smoke out of nervous habit and not for pure pleasure. He allowed the smoke to roll around in his mouth and then curl down his throat a bit to coat his palate. Next, he coaxed it up the nose, where exists another taste gland, and then it came out through the quivering nostrils. With no little ecstasy, the Senor discoursed on life and times of cigars. And then he goes on to talk about his love of Cuban cigars and cigars in general. And here we see that there's a description of how this gentleman, who's worked in the business for over 40 years, smokes his cigar and easily describes the retrohale, and also notes, right? It notes that where exists another taste gland. So it's like an additional boost, an additional way to taste the cigar. And it's noted here, there's no word retrohale yet here. This is 1975. Okay, this is this 1970s we're talking about. Long before the 2000s introduced the word retrohale. This is from the Freelance Star, and it is dated May 12th, 1990. Okay, 1990. And it says, the men who came to the New York world, well, let's tell you about the article's name is New World Indians Showed the Spanish How to Smoke Tobacco. The men who came to the New World with Columbus found out about tobacco. A Spanish monk was a member of an exploring party in the new land that Columbus had discovered. He saw a strange sight and told about it when he returned to Spain. What he had seen was some natives who held long wooden tubes. These tubes branched at one end to fit into the nostrils. The other end was held in the smoke of smoldering leaves. Thus, the smoke was inhaled through the nose. The natives called the tube a tobacco. From this came the name by which we now call the plant. Natives also rolled the dried leaves of the tobacco in corn husks and inhaled the smoke through their mouths. These were the first cigars and cigarettes in history. Cigarette really means little cigar. The word comes from the Spanish word cigarrito. It was the Spanish who first saw men smoking tobacco leaves, and it was they who introduced the idea into Europe after 1518. Within about 100 years, people all over Western Europe were smoking tobacco. The habit spread to Turkey and Arabia, and finally to China, Japan, and India. So, there's just a 1990 article about some of the origins of tobacco and how it was smoked originally. And we've heard the description of they were drinking the smoke. And did the natives retrohale? I believe that they probably did. And I believe that they didn't give it the importance that other individuals give it. I believe they just did it sort of just out of habit, and it was cultural, and they really had no idea about any of the ill effects of smoking or inhaling smoke or retrohaling or whatever it is. So there were little concerns from any medical standpoint from the natives. So what one gets to say, yeah, that was a cultural thing. The manner in which they smoked was cultural, and they had their reasons for smoking. Obviously, it wasn't always hedonistic pleasure, and although it could be. So that taken into account. Another thing I did is I watched a lot of videos on people smoking, and I don't know, it's just talking about regular people or in observing people in the lounge or anything creepy like that. I meant like video of celebrities smoking in interviews when they were allowed to smoke on TV, in their personal daily lives. People like Arnold Schwarzenegger, of course. People like even famous, cigar people like Perdomo, or just watching people like that smoke, and watching George Burns smoke, and just a variety of famous people, right? And I didn't see anybody really retrohale. And if they, not saying that they didn't do it, but if they did, they probably just didn't do it on TV, or they didn't do it on camera. And so I could find no evidence of any celebrity really retrohaling. And although I do know from what one YouTube reviewer commented that, yeah, there's certain, I would say young, but younger cigar titans that are retrohaling, like Tatuajes Pete Johnson. Perhaps, you can include Jesus Martinez of Martinez Cigars, who retrohales a little, and other individuals that retrohale in order to tweak their blends, and they use it as a tool to determine strength and certain flavors that that one may get out of their cigars. And even one may say tailoring a cigar or making a cigar that a retrohaler will enjoy and be pleased with, because they are aware that there is a smoker that retrohales. They want to add that layer of satisfaction to their cigar in making a cigar with a really good retrohale. And so the cigar industry, as you know, serves the cigar consumer. And if you want a good retrohale, you will get a good retrohale. You won't always get it in every cigar, but you will have some cigar makers that specialize in that and really provide that. I think Viaje does as well. And they can be excellent experiences to have, whether you retrohale these cigars or not. But if you do, then you get that little extra bonus that they throw in there for you, because that's how they're tailoring the cigar. And that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. I'm sure it's an even better thing for people who retrohale. But it still might not be good for some retrohalers who might find those flavors too irritating and too strong for him to take, be it the pepper or whatever it may be. I was going to save this for my General Grant video, but I felt like I had to include this because it's relevant. I will detail all of the years of the articles that I read in their regards to how they relate to the retrohale, but I believe the oldest piece of commentary article that I was able to get in regards to retrohaling in cigars, without specifically talking about the retrohale in general, was this Gettysburg Compiler from June 10th, 1870. And it says, "The New York Sun loyal radical thus notices General Grant contemplating his Waterloo defeat in New York. The Republican Party in New York is a disintegrated ruin, and General Grant, seated on a cigar box, contemplates this ruin, and in undisturbed placidity blows smoke through his nose." There you have it. General Grant was a retrohaler. Could you expect anything less out of a man that really was never without a cigar and was trying to get each and every little thing he could out of a cigar, including chewing on it, the fact that he also chewed snuff, the fact that he also smoked a pipe, and probably would have smoked a cigarette too if he had lived in those times, or if that was something that was popular in those days. He probably would have tried it. So he's a man that enjoyed tobacco to the fullest, if one can say that. Yes, to his detriment, of course, not to his advantage, but he indeed was a retrohaler. Now, another thing that I was able to do was I was able to conduct an interview with my grandfather in regards to the topic. And I don't always talk to my grandpops as much as I would like to. I think I would like to talk to him a lot more than I do. But when we do have talks, we have very lovely talks, and we discuss a lot of things. We discuss family, we discuss cigars, we reminisce, and we always have a good talk. Now, my grandfather isn't in the greatest of health, and he's 83 years old, and he's an Army vet. He's a Korean War veteran. sometimes when you get older, you don't remember things as clearly, and that's to be expected. And when your health gets the better of you, sometimes that can also affect many things. But my grandfather quit smoking at the age of 59, and he had smoked from a very early age cigars, of course. He was never a cigarette smoker as far as I can know, although he did say he dabbled. And he smoked for 46 years. So, like I said, he mainly smoked Cuban cigars. He smoked some Puerto Rican cigars. He may have experimented a little bit with Dominican cigars in the 70s. And then I basically asked him, I said, and this is the transcript of the interview that I conducted. Grandpa, do you remember ever smoking a cigar and blowing the smoke out of your nose? Grandpops, with a slight chuckle. No. Grandpa, but did you know that some smokers today do it a lot? Grandpops, with another slight chuckle. Quieren morir más rápido. Adding another gravelly chuckle. And I'll translate what that means, and I wanted to say that in his language as he said it in Spanish. And what it translates to is, they want to die much quicker. So, a loud chuckle and a laugh from me. And I add, but Grandpa, many smokers say they get more flavor by doing it, and that smoking any other way is not pleasurable, and they don't get all of the flavors. Grandpops replies, Tú fuma como es mejor para ti. La manera que te guste es mejor. Translation, you smoke the way you think is best for you. The way that you smoke and like is the best way. I add, but Grandpa, did you ever see fellow smokers blow smoke out of their nose? Grandpops replies, to be honest, it's been so long, I don't remember, but maybe. But Grandpa, was it something normal if it were to be done? Did you ever see anyone do it? I'm pressing here. Grandpops replies, it was not normal, maybe one or two guys. But Grandpops, do you think people are missing out on flavors that they should be getting to enjoy the cigar? Once again, I'm pressing. And Grandpops replies, I enjoyed all my cigars. And that is my grandfather, David Ortiz, Korean Army War veteran, non-retrohaler, smoked mostly Cuban and Puerto Rican cigars, age of 83, smoked for 45 years, and disease-free, although he has ailments, although he still longs to smoke a cigar with me. I love him, I respect him, and I respect his opinion. And like my good friend Stevie at the Cigar Show said, if you're enjoying your cigar, you're doing it right. Thank you folks for watching. Till next time on Backyard Cigars.